The cosmos hummed a deceptive silence, but the screams from the outer veil resonated louder than any battle cry the Kylosian hegemony had ever recorded. 1,000 Kylosian sensors went blind the instant the anomaly pierced Nova Belt, and within minutes, the repeater stations started failing. Not from enemy fire, from something deeper, something ancient, something wrong. Grand Warlord Tyron, the hegemony's supreme leader, loomed over the control deck of his flagship, the Silver King. His long, dark blue fingers tightened on the alloy rail as the final transmission from Kalen 7 satellite station crackled one last time before dissolving into absolute silence. No static, just nothingness. A dead channel. Replay the last 20 seconds, Tyron growled, his mandibles twitching with irritation. The technician, pale and trembling, obeyed. The voice came through, raspy, hauntingly human-like, choked with agony and awe. It's not a fleet, it's a graveyard coming alive. We fired everything. It smiled. A heavy thud, then screaming silence. Tyron had waged countless wars. He'd ordered the extinction of 3 sentient species, each defiant against the hegemony's iron rule. He'd witnessed planet-wide executions. Yet, nothing in his centuries of blood and conquest had ever sounded like this fear. True guttural fear. Until now. He spun to his war council. He said the Terrans were purged during the Animus cleansing, that their home world was glassed. It was Grand Warlord, General Varkin hissed. By our records, they were extinct 300 cycles ago. Then explain this. Tyron roared, slamming a claw against the projection. The image zoomed in on a fleet formation that defied all logic. Ships with hulls blacker than the void, shaped like jagged bones, floating cathedrals of war draped in torn, tattered banners. Some still bore the Terran insignia, long thought erased from galactic annals. But these weren't any Terran designs the hegemony had documented. They were older, angrier, and they moved with the chilling purpose of ghosts unwilling to rest. They're not responding to our hails, another officer muttered, his voice barely a whisper. But they broadcast one thing on a loop. Primitive Terran code. We've decrypted it. The message flashed across the hollow screen. Judgment comes. This time, no survivors. Panic wasn't a concept the hegemony tolerated. Yet now, you could taste in the air like a bitter poison. Deep within the ruins of the Kronos' outer rim, aboard the lead vessel of the Shadow Fleet, Captain Lyra Vance stood alone before the altar on the bridge. She wasn't a woman of faith, not anymore. Not after watching her home become a memory, then brutally erased from history. Her command was quiet, yet sharp, a razor's edge. Ready them, she ordered, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship. Her crew, augmented warriors who once wore dog tags, now wore the legacy of the lost, nodding in grim silence. They weren't entirely human anymore. Decades of exile, tech fusion, and a searing vengeance had transformed them into something else. Something that would have terrified even their creators before their creators vanished. They thought we died, Lyra whispered to herself, staring out at the vastness. Now we make them remember. Every agonizing second, a voice crackled through her neural comms, feminine but mechanical. First contact re-established with hegemony forward scout. No survivors. They tried to flee. Good, she smiled darkly, a chilling twist of her lips. Let fear carry the message. Tell the galaxy the Terrans are coming home to reclaim what was stolen. The war room aboard the Silver King crackled with tension and the smell of burnt ozone. Holograms flickered under the sharp gaze of Grand Warlord Tyron, his expression darkening with every passing minute. On the screen before him, orbital feeds collapsed one by one as the anomaly advanced. What began as a minor curiosity, strange sensor echoes from a forgotten system, had now erupted into a full-blown security meltdown along the hegemony's eastern flank. "Give me a live feed," Tyron barked, his voice making the nearest officer jolt. The technician, scales pale as sand, shook his head nervously. "We don't have one anymore. The last probe burned out trying to get close. It started emitting Terran brainwave patterns before it melted." "Impossible," hissed General Varkin, his mandibles twitching in disbelief. Terrans don't have the technological capacity to override hegemony protocols, let alone manipulate neural code frequencies. They didn't, the technician whispered, his voice barely audible, but something wearing their face did. Tyron clenched his claws around the armrest of his war throne. Deploy 7th Fleet. I want this infestation scorched. I want every atom of that system turned to vapor. He didn't wait for objections. The holograms shifted as orders rippled through the hegemony's military hierarchy. Massive carriers and dreadnoughts began forming up in sectors 14 through 18. Enough firepower to erase a dozen rebellious systems. Let them come, he growled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Let's see if ghosts bleed. Meanwhile, aboard the lead Terran vessel, the silence of anguish, Captain Lyra Vance stood before a wall of names etched in scorched steel. Every single one a soul lost during the cleansing. Some she'd fought beside, some she'd loved. All she had failed. She pressed a gloved hand against the cold surface. We didn't die for nothing. We died to become something far worse. Behind her, her second-in-command, Theron, approached with soft, augmented footsteps. Half his body was armor now, not by choice but by necessity. The machine parts kept him breathing, fighting. 7th Fleet's en route, Theron said, his voice a low thrum. Should make contact within 18 hours. They think they're bringing the pain. Lyra didn't respond immediately. Her eyes lingered on a name near the bottom, Lyra Vance. Her sister, only 15 when Kronos burned. I remember when the hegemony swept through the rim, Lyra finally said, her voice hollow. They didn't even speak. Just started burning cities, forests, oceans. Just wiped them out like we were vermin underfoot. All because we wouldn't kneel. Theron's jaw clenched. They made a mistake thinking vengeance had a shelf life. Lyra turned, her expression unreadable, a mask of cold resolve. No, they made a mistake thinking we were weak. The hegemony believed wiping out Kronos would break humanity. But what they killed, that was the version of us that cared, that dreamed. What rose from the ashes was something far more terrifying. Something patient. Something that remembers every scream. She walked over to the command deck, her voice steady. Bring the fleet in tight formation. Code. Hunt protocol. Tell the captains, no survivors. No signals. We erase them like they erased us. Leave nothing but the echo of their terror. Theron nodded and turned, the command already transmitting to the phantom network that connected the Death Fleet. Invisible, silent, terrifying. Hours later, in the inky blackness near the edge of hegemony space, the 7th Fleet emerged from warp like a spear of flame. 200 capital ships, thousands of interceptors and gunships, a storm of military might that had dominated the stars for millennia. Admiral Xylos, a three-hearted monster of a commander, stood proud aboard his flagship, the Conqueror Supreme. We've hunted pirates, rebels, even Black Sun cultists, he bellowed to his bridge crew, his voice a guttural roar. Today, we extinguished the last whisper of the Terrans. He didn't know he was speaking to the dead. The Terran fleet didn't decloak, didn't taunt. It just arrived, silent, unseen, like rot blooming beneath a veneer of health. First came the gravity distortions, minor anomalies easily mistaken for natural ripples. Then the stars blinked out, not from movement but from sheer mass. They're here, screamed a hegemony sensor officer. They're bypassing our scanners using something unknown. I don't even have hull signatures. Just void. The hegemony fleet opened fire. Missiles the size of skyscrapers. Laser beams that could crack moons. Kinetic rail slugs that broke the sound barrier in space. All aimed at nothing. Then the counterstrike came. It wasn't pretty. It was an unleashing of stored fury. The first Terran strike took out an entire hegemony battle group without a single warning ping. Ships were impaled by hyperdensity rods traveling faster than light, dubbed ghost nails by the few enemy survivors. Except there weren't many survivors to name them. The Conqueror Supreme shook violently as explosions rocked its starboard flank. "What is this?" Xylos roared. The view screen flickered to life, static humming. A Terran face appeared, weathered, scarred, one eye augmented with a red synthetic implant. Lyra Vance. You killed Kronos, she said, her voice a chilling whisper. Now, the Earthborn returned to collect their due. Then static and hell. Dozens of Terran ships decloaked at once, revealing what they truly were. Not just warships, but mobile vengeance engines, built from forgotten tech, dead gods, and broken promises. Their weapons weren't clean or sterile. They ripped and mangled. They screamed as they fired, mimicking the voices of the dead. Every blast was a cry of retribution. Back on the Silver King, Tyron stared at the live telemetry. The Seventh Fleet was gone. Not routed. Erased. Impossible, he muttered, his voice barely a breath. He watched the data again. Ships disappeared not from fire, but from sheer terror. Crews ejected into the void just to avoid staying inside those vessels. Weapon systems overloaded. AI cores corrupted themselves. Entire dreadnoughts turned around and self-destructed. New signals detected, the tech said in a whisper, his eyes wide with horror. They're not jamming us. They're just overriding reality in their radius. This isn't tech. This is mythology turned mechanical. Tyron turned to General Varkin. What are we fighting? Varkin didn't answer because he was gone. A pool of dark blue ichor stained the floor where he had stood and scrolled in it with the Terran words, one by one, the abyss of memory. Deep within the Terran fleet, Lyra stood before the Fleet Council. Each commander was a relic in their own right. Once human, now something more. They didn't speak in protocols, they spoke in vengeance. Seventh Fleet is gone, Lyra said, her voice resonating with cold satisfaction. They'll know now. They'll try diplomacy or religion. Maybe even mercy. The council laughed, a dry, metallic echo that sent shivers down even enhanced spines. Let them pray, one captain rasped. To whom? Asked another. Their gods don't answer anymore. Lyra smiled, a thin, cruel line. Exactly. The war had started without declaration. But now it has purpose. And purpose is more dangerous than any weapon the hegemony holds. Their retribution had just begun. The hegemony had ruled the stars for over 10,000 years. From the iron-forged gates of Orkan Varn to the glowing tomb worlds of Solter, their rule was uncontested, their history carved in blood and stone, their laws unquestioned. But now their legends were cracking. In the halls of the High Tribunal, chaos had replaced command. Tyron stood alone in the central chamber, watching his greatest generals argue like squabbling children. These weren't fresh-faced tacticians or cowards. These were architects of extinction, masterminds of subjugation. Yet the memory of the Seventh Fleet still echoed like a death knell in all their voices. We must summon the Black Sun Protocol, one barked. Release the Black Suns. They were bred to eat anomalies like this. Fools, shouted another. The Black Suns failed to contain the cult of entropy. You want to unleash them near our core worlds. It's better than waiting to be hunted like prey. Their voices rose until Tyron slammed his claw into the war altar, cracking the obsidian slab. Enough, he roared. You fear shadows. You fear phantoms. We are the hegemony, the architects of the stars. But these are no ordinary enemies, murmured one elder general, his voice laced with trepidation. Their tactics defy understanding. They do not engage conventionally. They prey on fear. They use trauma. Our crews report psychological infiltration, auditory hallucinations. I said enough. Divon Godao. We're not fighting ghosts. We're fighting what remains of the Terrans. Someone laughed bitterly in the corner. It was strategist Cal, rarely seen without a plan. His grin was grim. Not what remains, warlord. What evolved? We purged the Terrans. Yes, their bones fertilized our victories. But we forgot the most important truth of war. Tyron narrowed his eyes. Speak. Cal leaned forward, his voice a low, chilling rasp. Desperation breeds monstrosities. Years ago, long before hegemony wore engines glass Kronos, there were whispers. Not among soldiers, but among spooks. Black projects. Hidden labs. rebel cells with unknown benefactors. As the cleansing advanced, some Terrans didn't fight back with weapons. They disappeared, vanished into the black void between systems. Not because they feared death, because they had a plan. These were engineers, biohackers, geneticists, rogue AIs, and broken survivors. They took humanity's worst nightmares and made them into reality. They took pain and bent it into propulsion. They took extinction and forged it into a fleet. And they waited for this moment. On the command deck of the Silence of Anguish, Lyra Vance studied the incoming data streams. Her ships were silent again, cloaked within the folds of gravity pockets. They weren't resting. They were calculating, calibrating the pain they were about to inflict. She leaned over the hollow table and pulled up footage from the hegemony's central communications hub. Surveillance hijacked, Kylosian faces flickering in confusion. She spoke into the feed, her voice a cold declaration. You lied about peace. You called it pacification. You called it reform. You said we refused to adapt. But we did. You just weren't ready for what that adaptation looked like. Theron stood beside her, a jagged grin under his scarred face. They called us primitives. We're the future, Lyra said flatly. The part they forgot to fear. She tapped the interface, and across thousands of hegemony channels, a single image blinked on. Kronos. Not as it was, but scorched, smoking dead. Then below it, the message. We remember. Hegemony prime skies dimmed as new protocols activated. Entire defense satellites turned inward. Panic quarantines hit over 40 star systems. Tyron ordered the relocation of the royal gene lineages. If this war turned truly asymmetrical, the very bloodlines of command would be under threat. He summoned an old name, one they kept in stasis for centuries, Kale. A half-Terran, half-Kylosian genetic hybrid created during the early conquest of Kronos. Deemed unstable, deemed unnecessary, now deemed essential. You kept me on ice for this, Kale hissed as he emerged from the cryovault. His body was scarred from birth. Too Kylosian to be Terran. Too Terran to be Kylosian. You're the only one who knows them, Tyron growled, his voice a low rumble. I knew Terrans, Kale snapped, his amber eyes flashing. These aren't Terrans anymore. They're vengeance given shape. You'll fight them, and you'll win. Kale smiled, a chilling, unsettling sight. Then you better let me off the leash. In the cold void between star systems, the Terran fleet advanced again. Their next target, the Forge World Acheron, a planet-spanning factory that supplied over 40% of the hegemony's dreadnought weapons. Its surface glowed red with endless production, and its orbit swarmed with drone fighters. They expected a siege. Instead, they got a massacre. The Terrans didn't fire a single shot in the first wave. Instead, they released the mist, a gray molecular mist that slipped through every ventilation system, every gap in the hull. It wasn't a gas. It was a memory virus. The workers started to remember Kronos, started to feel the agony of Terran extinction. Some screamed. Others dropped to their knees, writhing. A few blew their own heads off. When the hegemony military finally responded, the mist had already rewritten their minds. One worker recorded a final, shuddering message before the planetary comms were jammed. I see their faces when I close my eyes. They're here. They never left. They just waited for us to forget. 2 hours later, Acheron was silent. Lyra stood aboard the Silence of Anguish, watching as the Terran fleet moved on. We don't need numbers, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Just memories sharp enough to bleed. And they will bleed. But the hegemony wasn't finished. Kale took command of a prototype fleet, a fusion of hegemony tech and forbidden Terran models taken from ancient wars. He called it Project Chimera, and he knew where Lyra would go next, Kronos. Not because there was anything left of Earth, but because ghosts always return to their grave. The Kronos system was silent now. No transmissions, no satellites, just dust, asteroids, and orbiting ruins where Kronos once spun, vibrant and defiant. The hegemony had named it Demonstratum after the cleansing, a symbol of what happened to Defiance. Now, the Silence of Anguish drifted into that orbit, and every surviving sensor array in the galaxy turned to it. Lyra Vance stood on the bridge, staring out at the corpse of her home. "Never thought I'd see her again," she muttered, her voice a low rasp. Theron stood beside her, quiet, hands clenched behind his back. "There's no blue left. Just bone." "No," Lyra said, her eyes fixed on the ravaged planet. "There's memory, and memory is fuel for the fires we're about to light." Around them, the Terran fleet began a slow, ceremonial formation. Each ship moved with practiced solemnity. This wasn't just a war zone. It was a cathedral, a graveyard. "Activate beacon pulse," Lyra ordered. A single wave of quantum particles rippled through the void, bouncing off shattered satellites, echoing through collapsed stardocks. The signal was old Terran code. Home. She turned to her comms officer. "Open channel." Seconds later, hegemony transmissions lit up like wildfire. Tyron appeared first, his face bloated with fury, scales twitching with tension. "You desecrate this place with your filth. You will die here, like the rest." "Funny," Lyra said, calm as stone. "I thought we already did." Then another face appeared, one Lyra didn't expect, Kale. Scarred hybrid and half Kylosian, but unmistakably Terran underneath. "You remember me?" Kale asked, his voice strained. Lyra's expression hardened. "You were a kid during the cleansing. Your mother died on Europa Station. Your father was the hegemony officer who betrayed us to save your DNA." Kale's smile was cruel. "So you do remember." Lyra leaned in, her voice cold. "What are you doing with them?" "Same thing you're doing. Surviving," Kale said. "But unlike you, I've adapted. I don't need vengeance. I need order. Peace. You're chasing ghosts. I'm building a future. Peace." Lyra spat, the word a curse. "You're just another weapon on a hegemony leash. You fight for the same empire that murdered your blood." Kale's eyes flared. "Don't speak to me about blood. I was left behind. My own kind looked at me and saw a mistake." Lyra's voice lowered, dripping with contempt. "You were a child. We protected you." "No," Kale said coldly. "You abandoned me. Hegemony gave me purpose. Now I'm giving it back." The comms went dead. The hegemony's Project Chimera fleet emerged from warp at the edge of Kronos, black and gold hulls gleaming with forbidden tech. Massive hybrid constructs powered by Terran neural code, fused with hegemony Warmind AI. Kale's flagship, the Cradle of Silence, led the charge. Unlike other hegemony ships, Chimera vessels didn't broadcast fear, they swallowed it. Their presence didn't chill the bones, it numbed them. They were surgical, soulless. On the silence of anguish, Theron looked uneasy. "He's using our tech, our design language, our pain." Lyra nodded. "They think by wearing our skin, they understand us. But they forgot something." "What?" Lyra's eyes narrowed, gleaming with an ancient fire. "We didn't build those ships for war. We built them for pure, unadulterated revenge. You can copy the bones, but you'll never understand the rage that powered them." The battle for Kronos began not with gunfire, but with silence. The Terran armada held position, unmoving, waiting. The Chimera fleet advanced in perfect formation, calculating, efficient. Then Lyra gave a command. "Let them speak first." Chimera vessels opened fire. Energy beams sliced through the void, targeting vulnerable nodes, just like the hegemony had trained them. But they missed, not because their aim was bad, but because the Terran ships weren't there anymore. One by one, they disappeared into folded space-time pockets, quantum cloaks, entropy wells. Chimera AIs began to lag, not from jamming, but from overthinking. The Terran ships reappeared behind enemy lines and struck. But they didn't use traditional weapons. They unleashed sound. Not just any sound. Kronos' last radio transmissions. Laughter, crying, music, prayers, children singing. 1,000,000,000 souls in one agonizing scream. Chimera systems glitched, their AI matrices flooded with emotional input. Hegemony tech had no answer. These weren't codes. These were feelings weaponized. The Cradle of Silence rocked violently. Kale staggered. "Block the transmissions," he barked. "We can't," his engineer shouted, tears streaming down his face. "They're not transmitting on frequencies. They're embedding the data into our perception layers. Kale's vision blurred. He saw a little girl, Taryn, burned, crying. She looked like his mother. He staggered backward. No. Lyra watched the chaos unfold with steel in her spine. They're breaking, Theron muttered, a hint of awe in his voice. No, Lyra said quietly, her voice chilling. He's breaking. Kale came back on the comms, breathing hard. What did you do? Lyra's voice was cold, unforgiving. You wanted to wear our history. Now you're going to drown in it. Kale's ship fired again, blindly this time. The silence of anguish dodged with inhuman grace. Finish him, Theron said, his hand reaching for a weapon console. Lyra hesitated. There was something in Kale's eyes now, not just rage, but regret. We wait, Lyra ordered. Let the past catch up to him. Let him suffer what we suffered. Kale sat alone in his chamber, watching the feedback loops. The girl's face wouldn't go away. He remembered Europa, the screams, the fire. His mother, trying to shield him from the hegemony soldiers who had orders to cleanse the bloodline. He'd survived because she begged them, because she died. And now, he fought for the very empire that did it. I'm not them, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm better. But even he didn't believe it anymore. Back in Hegemony Prime, Tyron watched the live footage with a mixture of disgust and despair. Shut it down, he barked. But sir, I said shut it all down. He turned to his remaining generals. We underestimated them again. Not because they have better weapons, but because they remember things we tried to erase. One general whispered, what do we do now? Tyron's voice was venom. We erased them again. This time, completely. But it was too late. Across the galaxy, oppressed systems saw what happened in Kronos. They saw the Chimera fleet falter. They saw the Terran ghosts rise. And they remembered Kronos. Not as rubble, but as vengeance incarnate. The Kronos system was no longer a graveyard. It was a throne. The Terran fleet orbited the shattered remains of Kronos, not in mourning, but in dominance. After the failed assault by the Chimera fleet, the message was clear. Humanity was not extinct. It had evolved into something far more terrible, an echo that couldn't be silenced. Across the galactic communication grid, images of the battle spread like a virus. Hegemony propaganda teams tried to suppress the footage, tried to reframe the defeat as a strategic withdrawal, but it was useless. The truth slipped through every firewall, every sensor. Entire worlds started asking the same question. What if the Terrans are right? In a slum city on the industrial planet Breath Prime, a miner named Kel sat in a broken cafe, replaying the battle over and over on a smuggled datapad. Around him, dozens of workers huddled in silence, watching Lyra Vance's fleet erase Chimera vessels like they were made of paper. My brother died fighting for the hegemony, Kel muttered, his voice low. But maybe he died for the wrong side. An old man coughed beside him. The hegemony promised us peace, but it only gave us chains. Kel looked back at the screen, then his eyes hardened. Then maybe it's time we break them. And so it began, small revolts, then larger ones. First on the outer worlds where hegemony control was weakest, then closer to the core. What had once been whispers became chants. Murmurs turned into uprisings, and one name was painted in blood and fire on the walls of hegemony buildings. Terran. Tyron stood before the high tribunal, fury boiling under his scales. The chamber was dimmer than usual. Some of the core world power grids had been disrupted, a sign of decay, of slipping control. This isn't war, he hissed. It's infection. They're not conquering us. They're making us doubt ourselves. One of the elders, a withered Kylosian with metal threads fused into his skull, leaned forward. Perhaps we should reconsider our approach. Offer them sanctuary. Absorb them. Tyron's claws slammed into the table. You want to negotiate with ghosts? They are not ghosts, the elder said, his voice firm. They're what we made them. The room fell silent. Tyron's eyes narrowed. Then we unmake them. Meanwhile, aboard the silence of anguish, Lyra Vance and Theron reviewed intercepted communications from the hegemony capital. They're scared, Theron said. Even their generals are second-guessing. Lyra didn't smile. She couldn't. Not yet. Fear isn't enough, she said, her voice a chilling promise. We need them broken. We need them to beg. Theron raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Mercy isn't in the game plan. This isn't mercy, Lyra said, her eyes glinting. This is justice served raw. She turned to her tactician. Prepare the Harbinger. It's time to make them pay. The Harbinger of Grief was the oldest ship in the Terran fleet, cobbled together during the first decade after the cleansing. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't fast, but it carried something no hegemony ship could withstand: the names of the dead. Every hull plate etched with the identities of those lost in the genocide. Every system coded with pain and memory. Every weapon driven by a singular directive: make them feel it. It was a ship built not to win. It was built to hurt. The target, Silver Prime, a jewel in the hegemony's crown, a luxury world wealthy and untouched by war, filled with nobles, commanders, and hegemony aristocrats who drank wine while Kronos burned. The Harbinger didn't announce itself. It simply appeared in orbit. One noble stared out his window at the dark silhouette in the sky. What ship is that? Seconds later, his mansion turned to ash. The Harbinger didn't fire traditional weapons. It released dirge cannons, energy pulses that infected buildings and systems with grief simulations. People experienced the cleansing firsthand for 10 minutes. Every citizen of Kelveron relived Kronos' final moments: bombs, fire, screams, loss. Some went mad. Some never woke up. Some took their own lives on the spot. And when the simulation ended, Lyra broadcast a single message, her voice echoing in their shattered minds. You watched us die. Now you watch yourselves. The Harbinger vanished as silently as it had come, leaving behind only the echo of unbearable sorrow. Kale Orex watched the footage from his med bay aboard the Cradle of Silence, still recovering from the battle at Kronos. His hybrid body ached, his mind even more so. He saw the message Lyra sent, heard her voice. It struck a chord he had buried long ago. They're not warriors, he said aloud, a realization dawning in his eyes. They're reckoners. He pulled up hegemony files on Kronos' destruction, the videos, the decisions, the protocols, and the lies. So many lies. They told him Kronos refused peace. They told him Terran struck first. But it was all theater. The hegemony never gave humanity a chance. Kale looked in the mirror and saw not a hybrid. He saw a traitor to his blood. Back in Hegemony Prime, panic grew. World stopped sending resources. Rebellions flared. On the communications grid, every hour brought worse news. Hegemony citizens were starting to sympathize with the Terrans. Even some military officers began leaking data. Lyra Vance had become more than a name. She had become a symbol. The flame the hegemony thought they had extinguished was now an inferno. On the silence of anguish, Lyra stood before a wall of shattered hegemony helmets, taken from battles across the galaxy. Each one a grim reminder. Message from Orex, Theron said, his voice flat. He wants to meet. Lyra turned slowly. Where? Alone? No escorts. He says he wants to talk, not fight. Lyra considered this, then nodded. Prepare my ship. The coordinates Kale Orex transmitted led to a cold, forgotten moon on the edge of neutral space. No satellites, no sentries, no mines, just dust and ice under a dead sun. It was a place the hegemony had once used for interrogations before deciding even that was too merciful. Now it was silent. The silence of anguish didn't follow Lyra to the moon. She arrived in an old Terran interceptor, barely held together by memory and rust. No escort, no weapons online, just her and the ghost she carried. Kale was already waiting. He stood at the edge of a ruined structure, cloaked in a dark Kylosian coat, but unarmed. His hybrid eyes watched Lyra approach with the weariness of a man walking into his own funeral. Funny, Lyra said, stepping into the open. You picked a graveyard. Kale's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Seemed appropriate. They stared at each other. No threats, no drawn weapons. Just two individuals shaped by the same brutal history, standing on opposite ends of what it had become. I didn't think you'd come alone, Kale said finally, his gaze fixed on her. Lyra shrugged. I figured if you wanted me dead, You'd have tried a long time ago. You had chances. Kale looked away, his jaw clenched. I did. Silence settled between them. Then Lyra asked the question that had festered for years. Why? Kale didn't answer right away. He knelt, brushing dust off an old Terran symbol carved into the stone, likely by a prisoner who died screaming. When Hegemony found me after Europa, I didn't know who I was. All I knew was fire. Screams. You were gone. The rest of the resistance had been turned to ash. He stood slowly. They took me in, fed me, trained me, showed me purpose. I thought they were giving me a second chance. Lyra's voice cracked like dry glass. They murdered your mother, and you thanked them for it? Kale's jaw twitched. They made me thank them. That stopped Lyra cold. Kale's voice trembled now. They burned the memories out of my head. Replaced them with programs. Indoctrination. I didn't even remember her face until last year. Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening infinitesimally. And now, Kale met her eyes, his own filled with a desperate pain. Now I see her every time I close my eyes. And I see you, the one who carried on when the rest of us died. The one who turned pain into something the galaxy fears. He paused, then added, but fear doesn't build a future. Lyra laughed bitterly, a sharp, cold sound. No, but it makes a damn good start. And right now, that's all we need. Kale sighed, a heavy sound. We're burning everything. If we keep going, there won't be a galaxy left to inherit. That's the point. Lyra snapped, her voice hard. We inherited nothing. Just bones and ash. That's what they left us. Kale stepped forward. And what do you leave behind? Another cycle of hatred? Another empire of terror? You're becoming what you hated. Lyra's face hardened, completely devoid of emotion. No, we're becoming what they deserved. Kale shook his head. That's what you wanted. But not everyone who survived wants this path. Lyra's silence was telling. You came here to kill me? Kale asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. I came here to see if you were worth saving, Lyra replied, her eyes unwavering. You're still not sure which side you belong on. Kale's expression darkened. And you? You don't even know what you are anymore. I'm the last voice of the dead, Lyra said, her voice a chilling vow. And I'm going to make sure they're heard, even if it kills everyone else. Lyra didn't blink, especially if it kills everyone else. Far above the moon, in orbit, Hegemony stealth drones observed the meeting, streaming everything back to Tyron. He watched the footage in silence, his advisors whispering behind him, eager to strike, to end it. Tyron raised a claw. No, he said, his voice a low growl. Let them speak. The seed of fracture lies between them. If we're lucky, they'll tear each other apart. On the moon, Kale turned his back to Lyra. I've done things I can't undo, he said, his voice laced with weariness. Ordered strikes, executions, but I never enjoyed it. Lyra stepped up behind him. I didn't either. At first, Kale looked over his shoulder, a flicker of something haunted in his amber eyes. And now I sleep just fine, Lyra said, her voice flat, devoid of any remorse. Kale looked away again, his shoulders slumping slightly. You're not him anymore, Kale said. The one who protected children in the Martian slums. Who took me in even though I was half Kylosian. No, Lyra said, stepping away. That man died when Kronos did. They stood in silence again, the desolate landscape reflecting their internal voids. Kale finally asked, his voice barely a whisper, if I walk away, what happens? Lyra didn't look at him. Then walk. But know this, the next time we meet, I won't hesitate. Kale nodded, a grim acceptance. Fair. Lyra turned back toward her ship, but Kale called out once more. There's a Hegemony relic site. Deep core. They're building something. Something worse than Chimera. I couldn't stop it. Lyra stopped walking, her back to him. They call it Oblivion Seed. Kale continued, urgency in his voice. It's not a weapon. It's a rewrite. Total memory collapse on a galactic scale. Lyra turned slowly, her eyes burning. Why tell me? Because I remember now, Kale said, his voice gaining strength. I remember who I was. Who we were. Lyra stared at him, then nodded once. Then you have one chance to prove it. Hours later, aboard the Silence of Anguish, Lyra stood before the war table. Theron leaned in. That was risky. He needed to look in my eyes, Lyra said, her gaze distant, fixed on the holographic projection of the hegemony core worlds. Needed to decide who he was. And if he betrays us. Lyra looked at the stars, a cold, calculating fire in her eyes. Then I finished what the hegemony started with him included. The hegemony's core vaults were older than their empire, hidden within a dying star's corona. They weren't built. They were buried, sealed by ancient codes and technologies stolen from species long dead. Even the hegemony's highest-ranking officials had only partial access to the information stored inside. It was here, in the blood-locked vaults of Sanctum Null, that the program known as Oblivion Seed was born. Kale Oryx had only ever seen fragments, encrypted blueprints, sensor transcripts. One line stuck with him, carved into the margin of a classified hegemony memo. Erase the sin by erasing the memory. Now, for the first time in his fractured life, he returned, not as a loyal instrument of hegemony will, but as a spy for the very people the hegemony had tried to erase. The journey to Sanctum Null wasn't tracked. Kale flew a black ship with no transponder, no hegemony insignia, just silent engines and an atmosphere so cold it could freeze oxygen. He'd expected a dead world. Instead, he found a thriving station orbiting the core. No lights, no defenses, just waiting. And that terrified him more than any fleet ever had. Requesting clearance, Kale spoke into the void. No response. Then a cold, feminine voice answered, not through his comm, but directly into his mind. Kale Oryx. Access level. Hybrid. Welcome home. The docking clamps seized his ship. Meanwhile, the silence of anguish prepared to follow. Lyra Vance paced the bridge, gaze locked on the holographic projection of Sanctum Null. You trust him? Theron asked, arms crossed. No. Then why are we doing this? Lyra's eyes narrowed, a ruthless determination setting her jaw. Because I don't need to trust him. I just need him to open the door to their demise. Within Sanctum Null, Kale stepped into corridors older than memory. Every wall whispered, not in language, but in feeling, shame, desperation, obsession. This was where the hegemony's soul had been buried, deep beneath its polished cruelty and military supremacy. Kale passed preserved chambers of extinct species, their minds downloaded into infinite loops of pain. He saw simulations of Kronos' destruction, over and over, rendered from hundreds of angles, studied like art. And then he found the core, a pulsating sphere of black glass, humming with something worse than power, memory. He approached, and the voice returned. Initiate sequence, Kale. Reclaim the forgotten. He paused, a moment of profound internal struggle, and then placed his hand on the interface. Above Sanctum Null, the silence of anguish arrived. Hegemony's sensors went dark. The Terran fleet spread around the star's edge like vultures circling a fresh wound. Lyra opened a channel. Kale, you in. Static, then I've reached it. You were right. It's not a weapon. It's a reset. Theron looked over. Explain. Kale's voice cracked, raw with horror. It doesn't fire. It doesn't destroy. It deletes. Whole star systems. Cultures. Species. It rewrites history from the inside out. Lyra's face was stone. That's how they won. Kale continued, his voice trembling. That's why there's no record of other empires, of what came before them. They didn't just conquer. They edited the galaxy. Silence fell heavy on the bridge. Then Theron muttered, they were never the first empire. No, Lyra said, a chilling realization dawning in her eyes. Just the last one anyone remembers. And we will make sure they remember us. Back in the Sanctum Core, Kale's hand trembled. If he activated the next phase, the hegemony's greatest secret would unravel. So would he. He could already feel the code scratching behind his eyes, trying to rewrite his own past. He pulled his hand away, an alarm screamed. Unauthorized hesitation detected. The voice said, colder now. Engaging fallback protocol. The sphere pulsed, and the walls opened. Kale stared in horror. It wasn't a device. It was alive. Thousands of bodies suspended in stasis. Neurons wired into a collective consciousness. A brain, not artificial, human, harvested during the cleansing. Dear God, Kale whispered, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. They hadn't erased humanity. They had absorbed it, and now they were trying to become it, to replace us. Back aboard the silence of anguish, Lyra's systems exploded with alerts. Energy spike inside the vault. Theron shouted, his voice strained. Lyra didn't hesitate. Send in the hounds. Tear that place apart. Dozens of Terran boarding crafts detached from the fleet, racing toward the sanctum like knives. Kale ran. Security drones activated, but he knew the corridors, knew where the hegemony's blind spots were. He ducked through a broken medical lab, past clone tanks filled with distorted Terran-Kylosian hybrids, failed experiments of assimilation. He reached a sealed chamber and activated a signal beacon. Lyra, you hearing this? They've built a sentient rewrite engine out of us, out of the dead. They're using our memories. Lyra's voice thundered into his calm shut. It, down. Kale slammed the override key he'd stolen during his hegemony days into the main console. Nothing. Then a face flickered onto the screen. Tyron. You disappoint me, Kale, he said coldly, his voice dripping with disdain. But I always knew your blood was polluted. I know what you did. Kale hissed, pure fury in his voice. You know nothing, Tyron replied, a chilling smile spreading across his blue face. The seed is not just survival. It is evolution. You and your kind were just the raw material. The chamber shook. The sanctum was awakening. Its purpose, a twisted mockery of life, began to unfold. The Terran boarding teams breached the vault. What they saw inside stopped them cold. The stasis bodies, the memories flickering through neural networks. Children, old men, soldiers, lovers, friends, all stored, all looping, all forgotten. Captain, one soldier whispered into the calm, his voice hoarse with shock and grief. We're standing in a mausoleum built from our people. Lyra's voice came through, cold and clear. Then light a match. Burn it all down. Kale reached the central override. He had one last choice, blow the core or link with it. If he linked, he could feed it truth. Every crime, every horror, every scream the hegemony ever silenced. It would mean his mind, his identity, everything, but would end the lie. He looked at the interface, then at the flickering image of his mother from the memory feed. I'm sorry, he whispered, and plunged his hand into the blinding light. The silence of anguish saw it first, a pulse of white radiating from sanctum null. Not destructive, restorative. Suddenly, archives across the galaxy unlocked. Lost languages returned. Extinct species reappeared in records. The truth spread like wildfire. The hegemony's greatest weapon had become its greatest confession. Tyron watched his empire collapse in real time. One system, then 10, then 100. Rebellions didn't rise this time. They ignited. His command network flooded with mutinies. And in the middle of it all, Lyra's fleet, unstoppable, unforgiving. Lyra stood at the helm, sanctum null burning behind them. And Kale gone, his mind uploaded into the seed. Not lost, just beyond. Lyra closed her eyes. For Kronos, for every forgotten soul. Theron stepped forward. Orders, Captain. Lyra looked toward the hegemony core worlds, a chilling glint in her eyes. Now we finish it. We rip them apart, atom by atom. The hegemony was collapsing, not from a single battle, not from a superweapon, but from truth. History, once twisted and edited into propaganda, now bled raw across every screen, every archive, every whispered conversation in the outer colonies. The long-silenced story of humanity's genocide was no longer myth. It was documented, verified, undeniable. Systems that once screamed loyalty now echoed with rebellion. Sectors shut off their hyperlanes, refusing to fuel hegemony dreadnoughts. Workers stopped assembling weapons. Soldiers defected or mutinied. Loyalist governors were executed by their own citizens. The Terran fleet didn't need to fire another shot, but they would. They would ensure the retribution was complete. At the edge of Hegemony Prime, the very heart of the Empire, Lyra Vance stood aboard the silence of anguish, watching as the last wall of orbital defense towers powered up. "They know we're coming," Theron said at her side. "They should," Lyra replied, her voice cold steel. "We promised we would." Below, the capital planet loomed, immense, industrial, and bloated with centuries of conquest. It was beautiful in the way cancer looked beautiful under a microscope, symmetrical, complex, and entirely poisonous. The hegemony had ruled from it for over 10,000 years. Today, that rule would end. Tyron stood at the central command chamber of the hegemony citadel. Only a handful of generals remained with him, loyalists or fools. It didn't matter. Screens blinked with reports of uprisings. Others simply turned black, systems gone dark as more planets went rogue or submitted to Terran control. "Bring the Skyfire array online," Tyron hissed, his voice raspy with desperation. An officer hesitated. "Sir, that will burn the upper atmosphere. It'll kill our own citizens." Tyron turned slowly, his blue face contorted with rage. "Then let them burn. They've already betrayed us." Above the planet, the Terran fleet broke formation. Lyra gave the order. Phase 2. Unleash the silence. The silence protocol wasn't a fleet maneuver. It was memory-made weapon, a targeted atmospheric drop. Millions of nanobeacons carrying raw memories of Kronos' destruction were injected into hegemony comms, visual channels, even through atmospheric particle dispersal. Cities below stopped functioning. People dropped what they were doing and fell to their knees, screaming, sobbing, or frozen in a trance as they experienced Kronos' last day. In a command bunker, a hegemony commander wept openly, muttering, "They screamed for help, and we laughed." "We laughed." Theron watched from a bridge. "We're not just conquering them," he said, his voice quiet with a mix of awe and dread. "We're unmaking them." Lyra didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on one blinking indicator on the display. "Target acquired," she finally said. Theron stepped closer. "Dong." Lyra nodded, a grim satisfaction settling on her features. "Bring me to him." Theron hesitated. "You sure you want him dead?" "More than anyone," Lyra said, her voice steady. "Let the ship fire. I want him to know." Lyra landed in the capital herself, escorted by a squad of Terran sentinels, former humans turned cybernetic avengers. Their armor bore the names of Terran cities lost in the cleansing: Nairobi, Berlin, Kyoto, Vancouver, Buenos Aires. The city was burning when they entered, not from Terran fire, but from within. The people had risen up. Statues of hegemony warlords were dragged through the streets, set ablaze. Schools once teaching false hegemony history now blasted recordings of Kronos' last transmissions, cries of children, defiant broadcasts, desperate final prayers. Lyra marched through it all, unstoppable. The hegemony citadel was in lockdown, but the sentinels had a code. Lyra's code. She had been to this place before, as a prisoner, years ago. She still remembered the layout, the smell, the screams. They breached the command chamber in under a minute. Inside, Tyron waited. Not armed, not commanding, just waiting. His robes hung heavy. His eyes, once so certain, now swam with something else. Confusion, bitterness, maybe even fear. "So," Tyron muttered, his voice hoarse, "this is what justice looks like." Lyra stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "No, this is what memory looks like. We gave you the gift of seeing what you tried to erase." "You were an infestation," Tyron spat, defiance flickering in his eyes. "A violent, erratic species. You'd have destroyed everything. You destroyed everything first." Lyra interrupted, her voice rising, edged with centuries of stored fury. "We begged. We bargained. You answer with fire." Tyron's voice broke, a raw, animal sound. "And now you've burned us." Lyra stepped closer, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Not yet." She drew a knife, not Terran steel, but hegemony alloy, taken from a dead commander years ago. She placed it on the table. "You remember Europa Station?" Tyron blinked, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "That was your first purge, wasn't it?" Lyra said, her eyes like knives. "You ordered it wiped out. Everything. Civilians. Scientists. Children. Tyron's jaw clenched, his composure finally cracking. I found one survivor there, Lyra continued, her voice chillingly calm. Half burned, barely breathing. You know what he said when I carried him out? No answer. He said, the stars lied to us. Lyra picked up the knife, its polished blade reflecting the burning city outside. Tyron swallowed hard, a visible gulp. What now? Tyron whispered, fear finally etched on his face. You kill me? Parade my corpse? No, Lyra said, her voice a cruel caress. You live. Didon binket, biwi. You live. You watch. You witness every rebellion. Every planet that tears down your banners. Every child that learns the truth you try to bury. She leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. And when the last hegemony system crumbles, when the last citizen spits on your name, then and only then will you understand what we became. Lyra turned, leaving the knife embedded in the table, a chilling monument to their shared history. That night, the hegemony flag was torn from the citadel and replaced with a single symbol, a black sun outlined with Terran letters. We remember. The galaxy watched as the hegemony fell. System by system, the Terran fleet didn't seize control. They didn't replace one empire with another. They left, letting each planet decide its path. Some reformed, some burned, some mourned, but all of them remembered. And that was enough. In the months that followed, Lyra Vance never returned to Kronos' ruins. She didn't need to. Kronos was no longer a place. It was a vow. Back aboard the silence of anguish, Theron joined her on the observation deck. You did it, Theron said, a weariness in his voice. They're gone. Lyra didn't respond for a while, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of stars. Then finally, they're not gone. Just corrected. Theron exhaled a long, slow breath. What now? Lyra looked at the stars, a cold, unwavering purpose in her eyes. There still lies out there. Still weapons like Sanctum Null. Still ghosts. Theron smiled, a genuine, if grim, smile. Then I guess we got work to do. And so the Armada moved on. Not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as shadows. A myth reborn. A warning etched into the bones of the galaxy. The Terrans are coming. And this time, they're watching. The stars were quiet again. Not because war had ended, but because a silence had returned. The kind of silence that followed truth when it finally had its day. In the outer edges of Sector 92, once a hegemony stronghold, now an open graveyard of their war machines, a boy named Corin walked alone through fields of rusting armor. He wore no uniform, no rank, just a tattered jacket with the words Earthborn scrolled across the back. Though he was born centuries after Kronos died, he stopped in front of a scorched hegemony helmet, picked it up, and stared into the empty eye sockets. His father had told him stories about what these things used to mean. Fear, control, certainty. Now they were relics, museum pieces, proof that even the powerful could be made small. Corin dropped the helmet and moved on, the wind carrying dust and ghosts alike. Elsewhere, in a former hegemony databank, now converted into a memorial hall, holograms played endlessly. Raw Terran footage, survivor testimonies, intercepted hegemony documents. People came from all systems to watch, to weep, to remember. Some came with rage in their hearts, others with shame, but none left unchanged. One recording on repeat had become a symbol of the new galaxy. A young girl's voice, one of the last children recorded on Kronos before the cleansing, singing a nursery rhyme off-key in a Martian classroom. She was never named, but her voice haunted 1,000 worlds. In a hidden Terran base built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, a new generation trained under the cold blue lights of simulation chambers. Not to conquer, to prepare. Lyra Vance had warned them before she disappeared. Victory is not a guarantee of peace. It's just a right to keep fighting with your eyes open. Some believed she had died after the fall of Hegemony Prime. Others swore they'd seen her on distant moons, in rebellion camps, even helping children escape pirate systems. The truth, Lyra had simply walked away. Not from the war, but from the title. She was no longer a captain, a leader, or even a soldier. She had become something far more dangerous, a myth. In a deep stasis pod aboard the preserved husk of the Harbinger of Grief, Kale Oryx remained asleep. Or rather, uploaded. His consciousness forever merged with the ruins of the hegemony's memory engine. But his presence could still be felt, in whispers, in dreams, in system anomalies that pulsed with encrypted warnings written in hybrid code. He was neither alive nor dead. Just there, watching. The hegemony, what remained of it, tried to rebuild. Scattered remnants of warlords, AI enclaves, and loyalist cults rose in the shadows. But they no longer inspired fear. Now they provoked pity, and when they crossed the line, the Terran Armada returned. Not to occupy, to remind. A single ship would appear in orbit. Sometimes it didn't even fire. It just broadcast that girl's song. That was enough. Some systems asked if the Terrans would ever form a government, a coalition, a replacement empire. But the Terrans said, no, we're not here to lead. The message always said, we're here to remember. And so they patrolled in silence, like the star's immune system, like memory's last defenders. In the end, the galaxy didn't become peaceful. It became honest. New powers rose, but none dared use the word purge. None dared rewrite their history, because they knew someone was watching, and the silence could end. Back in that scrap field, young Corrin sat beneath a cracked statue of a hegemony general. He pulled out a rusted Terran compad. On it, he played a recording. Lyra Vance's voice. Not yelling, not preaching, just speaking. They thought we were dead, thought we would vanish into the black. But you don't kill memory. You bury it, and memory always digs itself back up. The stars are wide. The void is patient. But when you lie to it, it remembers. Corrin looked up, smiled, and whispered the words every child in the new galaxy now knew by heart. We remember. Lyra Vance's mission was far from over. The collapse of the hegemony was merely the first step, a promise delivered. Now, the true work of retribution began, a silent, pervasive shift across the galaxy. The silence of anguish became less a warship and more a ghost, appearing unannounced in systems struggling to rebuild, observing, assessing. One such system was the former hegemony agricultural world of Series 3. For centuries, its inhabitants, the pastoral Xylosians, had been forced to labor, their harvests taken to fuel the hegemony's core worlds. When the truth of the Terrans' return had spread, Series 3 had been among the first to rise in furious, desperate rebellion. Now, its fields lay fallow, its cities scarred by the hegemony's final, brutal attempts at suppression. Lyra stood on the observation deck, watching the green-brown planet spin slowly. They're starving, Theron murmured, his voice grim. Hegemony supply lines are cut. The new provisional governments can't organize fast enough. Lyra's gaze was cold, unyielding. They sowed the wind. Now they reaped the whirlwind. Yet a flicker, almost imperceptible, passed through her eyes. Not pity, but a stark recognition of the consequences of their vengeance. Send a detachment. Not combat. Medical and agricultural drones. Provide aid, but make sure they know who delivered it. Make them remember the Terrans aren't just destroyers. Theron looked at her, surprised. This is different. Revenge isn't just about what you take, Lyra replied, her voice low. It's about what you leave. We leave a galaxy that remembers. A galaxy that learns. The small aid vessels, black and silent, detached from the silence of anguish, slipping into Series 3's atmosphere like benevolent shadows. For the first time in generations, the Xylosians saw a Terran ship, not as a symbol of terror, but of an unsettling, unexpected hope. And with that hope came the chilling, undeniable truth of the hegemony's monstrous past.